I desperately need a new workbench, and I've got quite a bit of scrap and reclaimed lumber laying around my shop. So I'm going to build a workbench that I've been wanting for probably 8 years now. I'm going to build the top of my workbench out of these 2x8s, which are actually 7 1/4 inches wide. Step 1 is ripping these boards in half on my table saw. My little contractor saw wasn't doing a great job making a perfectly even cut on an 8-foot board from end to end. So about halfway through these cuts, I switched up what I was doing, and instead of making one long continuous rip cut through these boards, I cut about 40% of the way through them and then flipped them and then cut the rest of the way. So instead of having one end that was much narrower than the other, I ended up meeting that cut in the middle, which helped me keep the edge of the board against the fence the entire way. Sometimes if you're not working with really nice professional equipment, you just gotta make do. In the end, it's not going to make a lot of difference because I'm going to mill these boards with a joiner and a planer. Hopefully when all is said and done, I'm going to end up with a 3-inch thick tabletop, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Either way, it's going to be a great improvement over what I've been working with. So now I'm going to focus on joining the faces of these boards. I'll worry about the edges later. So I'm going to use a pencil, mark up and down these boards. That way when I run them through my joiner, I can see if I've got any high or low spots. Once all of them have been jointed, I'm going to run them through the planer, get them to a nice uniform thickness.
So every board that's going into this workbench was completely free to make. Now the trick with working with free wood is a lot of times, most of the time, you're not going to get the nicest stuff. So be discerning about what you're putting through your equipment and watch out for nails, dirt, anything that might tear up a saw blade or a joiner or planer. You don't want to mess any of that expensive stuff up. These 2x8s began their life at the local big box hardware store, and if you've ever been down the lumber aisle in that place, you know you cannot find a straight, nice board for anything. So before we get to the glue, I'm carefully going over each one of these boards, and whichever side I want to be the show side, the side looking up at me whenever I'm working on this thing, I'm making sure there are no voids in that edge of the board. It's not a perfect science, these aren't perfect boards, but it's going to be alright. Now as I get ready to go absolutely bonkers with the glue, let me tell you what my strategy is for gluing this bench top up. I'm focusing right now on gluing these boards up in groups of 3. And the reason I'm doing it in groups of 3 is because I can still fit those bunches on my joiner and run them through my planer. I want these groups milled to a nice uniform thickness. I want smooth milled surfaces on all these faces so I get a solid glue bond across the whole thing.
I was afraid that might happen. Using what my dad called percussive persuasion. Power of a wedge. Simple machines, guys. I went a little bonkers with my glue and I had a little bit of tear out. So you can see that piece right there came out of that right there, which this is going to be the top of my workbench, and I wanted to avoid having any big gouges or voids in the top, and because of my glue I'm going to have a little bit. However, there's a really good chance I'll be able to take that imperfection out with a joiner. And if for some reason there's a little bit left over, I'll find a way to take care of it. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how that went.
So these bunches of boards are really heavy, and if you're going to be doing this, please be careful. Joiners like to eat fingers. You should be scared of these machines and show them the respect they deserve. However, they do great work, and I am so grateful to have a joiner and a planer in my shop finally.
Here's a little trick. If you run out of long enough clamps, in a pinch, you can, connect them. It's definitely easiest on the pipe clamps because those ends swivel, so you get a great bite here, I guess on the outsides, and those insides do great. F-clamps, probably the worst, and these cheapo Hobo Freight bar clamps, they do okay. Nothing beats having one that's long enough to go the whole distance, but in a pinch, that will do. After another little quick round of tap-tap-taparoo with a rubber mallet, the next thing I'm going to do is grab a framing square, draw a nice straight line down one end of this, and then get a nice clean cut. I'm going to use a circular saw, and I'll have to finish it with a hand saw because my circular saw doesn't have a deep enough cut to go through
the entire depth of the tabletop. We'll start with one end, get it nice and square, and then we'll start laying out where my legs need to go.
I'm going to use these reclaimed 4x4s for the legs and the support stretchers, whatever, that are going to connect the legs underneath the table. I'm saying reclaimed, and I mean reclaimed. Unearthed may even be a better word. I literally dug these boards out of the ground. I'm sure there are people that will say that this is completely ridiculous, that, look, if you're going to do this with these boards, this one literally has a burn mark on it, and then run that through a joiner and a planer, you're out of your mind. It'd be cheaper just to buy new 4x4s. It's my table. I'm going to do what I want. I think when these are milled up, they're going to look really nice. They're going to have a lot of character. They're going to have that history of coming off the farm for whatever that's worth. Probably nothing to anybody but me, but it's my table. So I did take a wire brush and clean all the dirt off of these, hit it with some really aggressive sandpaper and a shop vac, and got as much of the dirt and gunk and off of this stuff that I can before I run it through my expensive equipment. And I'm excited to see what we can pull out of these, because I think it's going to look really nice. If for some reason they fail, you know what? I'll just fix it then.
If I could offer you a piece of advice, is I try to use a box cutter as a marking knife, just because you don't have the nicest tools, or maybe you don't know perfectly how to do something, or you're not working with the nicest woods, the most exotic woods that you can find for a particular project. It doesn't mean you can't do this stuff. Treat everything as an opportunity to learn and get better. For example, I learned here that while a marking knife for this process is nice, it's not necessary, and for a workbench, a pencil line is going to do just fine, and a box cutter does not make a good marking knife. This is, however, my preferred way at the moment to cut tenons and lap joints. Mark out how big you want that joint to be, how far back you want that shoulder set. Make a whole bunch of cuts with your circular saw, and then bang out all those pieces with a hammer, with a chisel, whatever you've got. You can clean it up with a block plane, with a chisel. Just, I don't know, use your imagination. But it's a great way to learn and experiment with some basic joinery if you haven't done that before.
I'm going to set these legs in 12 inches from the end of my table, just to give me ample clamping space down here at the end. If I ever want to add a vise later on, I can do that. Darken that up with a pencil just so we can see it better. Mark my X's on this side. I feel confident that line is 12 inches. I'm going to label each of these legs. So I'm going to call this one A. And I'll even put that further down too, just so I can find it again. And I'll do it on all these sides, or at least a couple of them, so I can find it easily. All of these legs should be the same length, but I don't necessarily trust it to be, I said same length, they should all be the same width. Everything should be the same. But I don't necessarily trust it. So what's just, for the sake of being right, all these tenons should be cut the same depth here. We'll just label the legs, and that way I know for a fact where everything should match up. So we're going to bring this in, rest that on the shoulder. We'll make this hole, this mortise, just a little bit bigger than we need to. And now we can mark our width. So now we have the width of our mortise established. This leg is going to sit down in here about like that. The tenon is going to be on the inside of that mortise. But if I set it this way and reference this point right here, this will still set in where it's supposed to. And then the whole width of this thing, we're looking for this dimension here. We'll just lay this flat, reference this. I don't need this to be perfect. I'm gonna glue it, shim it, whatever I have to do to get this nice and tight. I can see my marks extending out just a little bit there. Now our mortise is marked out, and we're gonna get ready to fix that guy up. So how many of y'all have a shop chicken? I didn't until today.
The best way I have to cut mortises right now is to first hog out as much of that mortise as you can with a drill. I'm using a Forstner bit, but if you have a spade bit or just whatever you can get your hands on, it'll work fine. Just remove as much of that material as you can. And then I used a router to get as close to my layout line as possible. Now, a router removes a lot of material very quickly, so you have to be very careful here, but get as close as you can, and when you're done, you can clean that up with a chisel. Now, the thing I did to make my router job just a little bit easier was to chisel down far enough so that the bearing on my bit could rest against the inside of the mortise. So I made that chisel line just as clean as I could get it, and as I moved that router around the inside of the mortise, taking material as I went, I was stepping my plunge router down and just cleaning that hole up until I was ready to flip the table over. I transferred my layout lines to the sides of the table And one last thing before I flip this bench top over, let's cut it to its final length.
Hey, listen, you wanna watch this? Look.
What are you doing?
Bloop.
Hey,
All the way down.
how you read?
I'm really eager to get this thing flipped over, but there's a few other things I've got to do first. With the bench. With the bench on its back and the legs mocked up in place, I'm going to go ahead and measure exactly how tall I want this table. So what I've decided on is 38 inches. I feel like that's going to be a good height. I'm about 6 foot, 6'1", somewhere in that area. 36 inches is a little too short, for at least I think it is for me. I'm going to go ahead and go 38. If I need to shorten it down later, I can do that. So it's not that big of a deal. And it doesn't exactly have to be perfect either, because the floor of my shop isn't level. So any minor discrepancies here and there, I mean, I'm going to be able to get it really close, but any minor discrepancies, I'll be able, you know, to shim it one leg or another. It'll be imperceptible, so it doesn't matter to me. Now, before I pull these legs out of here, now that I've got the final length marked on where I need to cut them, I'm going to square these up with my little squares here. And then I'm going to measure, so these stretchers here, these boards are going to be stretchers in between these legs. I got some that run this way and some others that'll run this way. So I'm going to go ahead and mark them. They're going to be secure with lap joints and pinned and all that fun stuff, you know. So I'm going to go ahead, get these squared up, mark them, and those will end up helping hold all this thing square while I get the legs set in. So I am not an expert at cutting mortise and tenon joints, and this right here isn't perfect. Now, one thing you can do to make that better is to add a small chamfered edge around the bottom of the table and around that on this leg, and that way it'll kind of blend that corner in and where that unevenness doesn't quite stand out as much if it's not perfect. The chamfered edge also adds another benefit in that if you're walking around this thing and your belt loop or your pocket or something grabs onto that, you don't break off a big chunk. It softens that edge. I'm going to do it all along the bottom. When the table's flipped over, I'll do the top two. I'll do that. I don't know, just do as much as we like. This is a super nice router, and I got it for dirt cheap off of Facebook Marketplace a couple years ago. Super, super happy with that purchase. Again, it's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be. I'm just trying to make a nice, functional piece that I don't hate to look at. I can be proud of it. And you know what? I don't know, I'm just so excited to get done. I'm so excited to get done with this.
Cutting these lap joints with the table standing up turned out to be a little tricky, but I had absolutely no desire to flip this bench back over. Right now I just secured these stretchers with screws. Later on I'll go back and pin them with dowels.
I am so happy with how this workbench turned out, and even with it taking longer than maybe I thought it would have, I'm sure if you were devoted to finishing it in a timely manner, you could get it knocked out, but that's not the life I live, so you know what, I'm just doing my best. This was a great opportunity to learn and kind of refine some of those woodworking skills that I don't get to use near as often enough. Maybe with a workbench I'll be able to get out here more often and do a few more things. My biggest takeaway from this project is nobody's born with these abilities. You don't just become a woodworker because you're born with, you know, some innate ability to do this. Everything takes practice and hard work, but with enough time and enough practice, you can be really good at something and, you know, build something that you're really proud of. My final dimensions ended up being 27¼ inches deep and 76 inches long, so, you know, 6 feet, a little bit over 2 feet deep. It should be more than enough work surface for the stuff that I do on more of a day-to-day basis. And I know I'm already going to be changing a few things, like adding a vise on one side and maybe putting a shelf underneath. I don't know where this is going to take me, so if you want to see any of that, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. This has been a blast. Thank you for coming along on this project with me. My name's Reagan. This is the GWP Homestead. See y'all soon.